went to Florida and pastored a church for 12 years, Grace Baptist Church. God said to me one day, I want you to go to Alaska as a missionary. That was 1970. I arrived in Alaska. That was just at the time that they announced they were going to build the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. The largest pipe ever constructed on the face of the earth for the carrying of crude oil. The biggest project ever undertaken by private enterprise in the history of the world. And they said that 35,000 pipeliners were going to converge on the state of Alaska to build that 800-mile, 4-foot diameter pipe. And the first thing that came to my mind as a missionary just arriving on the mission field, 35,000 of the roughest, toughest, cussingest, drinkingest, honoringest folks on the face of this earth. I said, they must need some spiritual guidance.
Amen.
So they did too. That was the understatement of the year. And I went to Alaska Pipeline Service Company and I said, don't you need a chaplain on the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline? He laughed at me. He said, we never had a chaplain on any pipeline in the world. We wouldn't know what to do with you. Well, I kept going back and back and back. I guess persistence paid off, and finally they said, okay, we'll give you the northern 7 work camps, which was Prudhoe Bay, the big oil field, Arctic Ocean, all the way down to Galbraith Lake and the Brooks Mountains. And he said, just go up there and see what you can do. I'm sure they thought I'd last about a week and come home amongst those men, but I didn't. 6 months later, I was still at it. And one day, Mr. R.H. King, personnel relations man with Alaska, called me on the phone, and he said, Chaplain, you're saving us thousands of dollars of counseling fees we aren't having to pay. He said, your religious denomination pays your salary. And he said, we've decided that you're a great help to us. We would like to offer you, if you will accept it, executive status.
Wow.
And I said, well, what does that mean? I've never been an executive on anybody's board but the Lord's. And he said, it merely means that you can go any place you'd like, see anything you want to see. And he said, we would like to invite you, when you're at Prudhoe Bay, and we're having a board meeting, we'd like to invite you to sit in on our board meetings in an advisory capacity.
Wow.
In order to help the relationship between management and labor. He said, you can't vote, but you can sit there, and I got to listen.
You didn't even know what was just happening to you. Some of the biggest things in the world for people to understand goes on in those board meetings, and you get to listen.
A little insignificant, unknown aviation missionary out in the bush of Alaska, sitting with the elite, the ruling elite of the world for 3 years' time.
Wow.
There's no way in the world this could happen except the providence of God. He wanted me there so I can tell you this story today.
And also to make the men more comfortable, you told me, too.
Well, yes. And so,
and to solve problems.
For 3 years' time, I sat across the dinner table from them like you're doing. You'd never meet these people. You can't get to know them. They don't allow themselves in the public to know people that much. And I sat with them, lived in the dorms with them, was invited to stay in executive dorms, heard what the elite had to say. I'll never forget one day, I'd been with these people all day long. That morning I'd hosted some person on the pipeline, and later I think some congressman had come up with something, and then that afternoon sitting with another group of them and so on. And I was devastated. You see, I was brought up in a Christian home. I had a godly, wonderful, godly mother and dad, and a grandmother who won me to the Lord at 11 years of age. And all of a sudden, I'm thrown into the midst of the ruling elite of the world, a den of thieves, so to speak. And I remember that night, I was just devastated. I went back to my dorm room. I laid down on my bed. I looked up at the ceiling and I literally cried out to God. And I said, oh God, how can there be such dastardly people on the face of the earth as the people I've been with today? That by design and intention rule the lives of human beings. They know what they're doing. They intentionally control nations and currencies and people and the world. And they do it in advance, and they do it by design, and they do it by intent. And I'll never forget that day. Well, I met the elite. they're positive, and I don't know how to express this enough, because since you've never met them and you've never lived with them, the only thing I can do is just tell you what I lived and saw. I need to say emphatically again to every person in the listening audience of this DVD, there positively is a group of people on the face of the earth who control the world. They tell the president what to do. They dictate to Congress what bills to pass. They control everything in our life. They control the amount of paycheck, the money that you make. They control everything that we do. They have the control of the world today, and there positively is such a group of people living on the face of the earth today, and they control the world. I don't know how to say it any other way. Let me give you an example. 1984. I was sitting in my home. This was after the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. I was sitting in my home in Kasilof, Alaska, and the phone rang. And the man on the other end of the line, I had not seen him since the pipeline, and he said, "Chaplain, you know, the elite are human.
Yes.
They love to brag, and some days they feel better than they do others." And he'd call me up, and he said, "Chaplain, do you want people to think you're a prophet?" That's quite a statement. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" Now, at that time, oil was $32 a barrel. He said, "Do you have any speaking engagements in the next few weeks?" I said, "Yes." Just so happens I start next week in Seattle, Washington, wind up in Southern California about 3 months later, speaking almost every night. He said, "Every place you go, tell them that oil is going from $32 a barrel to $9 a barrel." I said, "No. No way." I said, "It can't happen." I said, that would devastate the world." He said, "But it's going to." He said, "Come on, Chaplain." He said, "You sat in our board meetings. You know who controls the price of a barrel of oil." He said, "Now come on, get off of it. Go tell them." I did. My audiences, I literally had some audiences that broke out laughing at me. They knew it couldn't happen. And when it did, my phone rang off the hook. They said, "You're a prophet." And I said, "No, I'm not. I told you first I wasn't." That I was just voicing what he said. But it was the same time that gold went from $800. You remember it had spiked up to about $800 an ounce, and it went back down to $250 an ounce. And all this was timed perfectly by the elite, because they had told the Arabs, "Buy gold, buy gold, buy gold," when it went up to $32 a barrel. And they bought train carloads of gold back in those days at $700 and $800 an ounce, because that's what they'd been told by the elite to do. And then when the price of oil went from $32 a barrel to, they didn't quite make it to 9, they went to 10. And when it got to $10 a barrel, the Arabs had to sell, in order to maintain their economies, they had to sell their gold back to the same people they'd bought it from at $700, $800 an ounce. They had to sell it back at $250 an ounce in order to keep the people under the sheikhs and the sheiks from rebelling against them and overthrowing them. And every bit of it was planned, and I was told about it 3 months in advance. And it was all planned exactly for that purpose.
Wow.
They knew exactly what they were doing. Now, the same, identical same thing is happening today, except for the past 35 years. Every time I have heard one of these elites say something, I have voiced it, and I do have contact with a number of them even yet, and I would merely tell what they know. Now, I know people. I understand the mindset of the elite, and I express it in one sentence. The name of the game is control. Some of these people that I rub shoulders with, if they wrote a check for $1 million every day, they would never spend all of their wealth in their lifetime.
Wow.
It's not all about money. Even though it is partially about that, it really is about control, manipulation of people, having control over nations. As a result, I have written 3 books about the ruling elite. My first book was The Energy Non-Crisis. It became famous overnight and became a bestseller. My second book was To Seduce a Nation. And then my third book, which is out of print, Syndrome of Control. And all of these I wrote attempting to explain the mindset of the elite, so that people could comprehend how these people think. because they don't think in the same terms that you and I think in. They think only in terms of manipulation and control and power. Many years ago, there was a man by the name of Quigley. Quigley wrote a famous book, I'm sure you've heard of it, entitled Tragedy and Hope. And after he wrote the book, someone said, Mr. Quigley, now by the way, Mr. Quigley was one of the elite of his time. And they said, Mr. Quigley, you wrote a book telling everything about the elite, how they think, what they do, how they manipulate, and you've even told what they're going to do. Aren't you afraid? Didn't it bother you? Aren't you concerned? Mr. Quigley said, no, not at all. They said, why not? He said, nobody's going to believe me. Well, I know. They're sitting there in front of the television set right now watching this DVD, and they're saying, this guy, he didn't know where in the world I can believe all this. Well, just stay around a while. You'll just like Quigley, he knew exactly what he was writing, and he wrote it.
Why do they want the control? You see, most people think that the ruling elite, all they want to do is make money. Well, money is only a tool. The objective is really control. Why do they want so much control?
Well, money, first of all, is nothing. It's a piece of paper. It's a Federal Reserve note. It has no value to them at all. The only thing they want is power. Same thing Hitler wanted, same thing Mussolini wanted, same thing Stalin wanted. They want control of human beings and control of nations. It's the inner being of somebody to want to control somebody else when they don't know what the Bible has to say about how a person should live. It's a human trait to want to control other human beings.
Well, let me give you my take on that. I think that the reason they want the control is to bring everyone on the globe down to one central question. Either you take the mark or you lose your head. Ultimately, that's where it's going.
I agree. That's the ultimate goal. You're exactly right. You and I have studied the Scriptures, therefore we know that. So let me tell you just a little bit about the man who told me these things so that you will understand DVD number 1, Tragedy. Remember the book?
Right.
DVD number 2 is Hope. DVD number 3, and I'm warning you in advance, you may not want to watch it. It's entitled Reality. It will startle you. You may have trouble sleeping at night. It positively is psychologically disturbing. But I'm going to give it. I've never given these things before. And many of these things I will not say on a radio talk show because I wouldn't dare tell what they had to say about our present president. I'll say it in this DVD as we go along. This man is over 85 years of age. Now, when you get to be 85 years of age, you start over 85 years of age, should I say. You begin to think about eternity. You know that around the corner somewhere that every person you've ever known wound up in the same place underneath, 6 feet under. And people begin to think. And regardless of what their status in life is, sometimes they would like to confess. Now, I'm not saying that's what this man did. But it's my guess that if I could say why he told me the things that you're going to be hearing on these DVDs, there's only one reason he told me. He wanted to get it off his chest. Now, it was quite amazing. 2 years ago, he didn't do this. But only a few days ago, when he gave me all of these things you're going to hear, and I've just begun. I really haven't given you the meat of it all. But he said, Chaplain, feel free to call me back anytime you want to. I plan to give monthly updates on what the elite are doing and hope to be able to inform you, my listening audiences exactly what they plan to do.
2 questions. He said you could call him back at any time. That tells me that you really have a good relationship with him. But the second question is, why is he able to release so much of this information without putting himself in some kind of jeopardy?
Quigley. I'll refer back to his book. He was one of the elite during his lifetime. He said, I'm not worried. Nobody's going to believe me anyway. The majority of people, until they see these things happen that this man said, you're going to wonder if this man was really telling the truth. And someone said to me the other day, they said, well, don't you think they might deceive you in order to destroy your credibility? Well, that's a chance I have to take in order to be able to give you the truth. I've done that for 35 years. I've chanced my reputation on the fact that these people were telling me the truth and not just leading me on. So that's what I'm doing, and you just watch it. Number one, let me try to explain. The elite have altered their timeline. 2 years ago, I